بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. أسأل الله تبارك وتعالى أن يجعل نياتنا خالصة لوجهه الكريم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. I praise Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala for the endowment of Islam. And I ask Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala to send countless blessings and salutations on our Master Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, his pure family, his honorable companions, and all of those who follow them in excellence until the day of judgment. And I ask Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala to grant us all the sincere intentions. Alhamdulillah, Sayyidi Abu Yasin Shadili. I hope that you are in a state of afiyah, that you are recovering well. May Allah grant you shifa, as well as all of our other brothers and sisters who have fallen sick. May Allah give them a shifa, give them a healing and al-afiyah and well-being, and allow them to be patient with whatever Allah afflicted them with, knowing that the one who receives the most calamities, and they are a believer and they are patient, it is a sign of their closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is a sign of Allah's love for them. May Allah allow us to be patient in the time of calamities and sicknesses and loss of wealth, that we show sabr in those times. Insha'Allah ta'ala, we're going to start with a biography today of the great Imam Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. So if you turn to your Reliance of the Traveler, page 1030, biographical note X47. Inshallah, we'll start our reading there before we go into Sunan at-Tawfiq. Naam, go ahead.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah. The author, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy on him, said, Abu Hassan Ash'ari, A 1.3, is Ali ibn Ismail ibn Ishaq Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari, the Imam of Ahl Sunnah and tenets of faith, born in Basra in 268-74.
Here, you'll notice that when he gave the name of Sayyidina Imam Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari, he called him Imam Ahl Sunnah fil Aqidah, the Imam of Ahl Sunnah in the creed. Imam Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari, his methodology has been agreed upon by the Muslim scholars after him as a methodology in the creed, in the belief that is consistent with the methodology of the followers of the companions and of the companions and of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to the extent that the people who follow the methodology of the Prophet, Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah, among one section of them is known as Al-Ash'ariyya or Al-Asha'ira, indicating that they follow the methodology of the great Imam Abul Hasan al-Ash'ari. So when we say those followers of Imam Ash'ari, they're called Al-Ash'ariyya or Al-Asha'ira. Right? And if you want to say that in English, the Ash'aris. Allah. Allahu Akbar. Why is this not working the way I want? My computer is every day acting up. Now, so when we speak of the followers of Imam Abul Hasan al-Ash'ari, we say al-Ash'ariyya or al-Asha'ira, meaning the Ash'aris. What is meant by that are those who follow the methodology and the systematic structure of conveying the creed of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his companions and those who follow them. That methodology, as was employed by Imam al-Ash'ari, and those convictions that were conveyed by Imam al-Ash'ari and those who followed in his footsteps, those people are known as al-Ash'ariyya or al-Asha'ira. Now,
a descendant of the companion Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, he was a Shafi'i scholar and the founder of the school of tenets of faith that bears his name and reflects his powerful intellect and profound knowledge of the Holy Quran and Hadith.
Here, so Imam al-Ash'ari, most of the scholars mention in al-Fiqh, he was following the Shafi'i school. And he is the one who developed the school that is known as the Ash'ari school. And that school reflects his understanding and his knowledge of the Quran and the Sunnah. So here, when we say Ash'ari, it doesn't mean that we have abandoned the Quran and the Sunnah. Rather, what is intended by following this great Imam is that we're following his deduction of the tenets of faith from the Quran and from the Sunnah and from the consensus of the previous generations in a systematic way that the common people would know what they're supposed to believe. So it is a methodology based on the Quran and the Sunnah and the consensus of the Muslim nation. Hence, that's how that school has been called Al-Ash'ariyya or Al-Asha'ira. Now,
Imam Ibn Hajar Haytami has defined Sunni Muslims, Ahl Sunnah wa Jama'ah, as those who follow Abul Hasan Ash'ari and Abu Mansur Maturidi, the two Imams of Ahl Sunnah.
And here, Ibn Hajar al-Haytami, he was a great Shafi'i of the latter school. Imam al-Haytami, he wrote many beautiful books in Islamic law and tenets of faith and avoiding the major sins. He mentioned in his books that Ahl Sunnah, they are Al-Asha'ira wal-Maturidiyya. Ahl Sunnah are the followers of Imam al-Ash'ari and Imam al-Maturidi. And I should put Imam al-Maturidi is the great Imam Abu Mansur al-Maturidi. He died 333 AH. Imam al-Maturidi is the one who founded the other school that Ibn Hajar al-Haytami mentioned, which was known as al-Maturidiyya, right? Named after al-Imam Abu Mansur al-Maturidi. So the Sunni Muslims, historically, from their time in the 4th century, Ahl Sunnah, the Sunni Muslims, have been known as al-Asha'ira or al-Maturidiyya. And not only Ibn Hajar al-Haytami, who died in the year 974 in the 10th century, mentioned that, but it was mentioned by the great scholars of that time, like al-Imam Abdul Wahhab al-Sha'rani. He mentioned the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah are the Ash'aris or the Maturidis. Imam Abdullah ibn Alawi al-Haddad, he mentioned that the Ahl Sunnah are al-Ash'ariyya or al-Maturidiyya, as well as the great seal of the Arabic linguist and the great Hafiz, the great Imam Muhammad Murtada al-Zabidi, radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. He mentioned in his book, Ithaf al-Sadat al-Muttaqeen, Bisharh Ihya Ulum-ud-Din, in his explanation of the Ihya Ulum-ud-Din of Imam al-Ghazali, he said that Ahl Sunnah, they are the Ash'aris and the Maturidis. Now,
the substantive differences between the two Imams amount to about 6 questions, though because the scholars of the Maturidi school were mainly confined to the lands beyond the Oxus before the Mongol depredations and decimated thereafter, the Ash'ari school has been standard bearer for the faith of Sunni Islam for most of its history.
why? Excuse me. So the Maturidi school, because of where Imam al-Maturidi lived in, which is the areas of Russia, Samarkand, Bukhara, in those areas. And the Ash'ari school was basically in the main Muslim lands, Baghdad, Iraq. The Ash'ari school spread much more. And hence, when you say Ahl Sunnah and you say Al-Ash'ariyya, Al-Maturidiyya is included, even though they are really distinct madhabs and they have different approaches in certain issues. So when you say Ash'ari, it is also known as Al-Maturidiyya. Now,
originally educated in the school of the Mu'tazilites, as discussed in W6.4, Imam Ash'ari saw the Prophet ﷺ, Allah Ta'ala bless him and give him peace, in a dream 3 times one Ramadan, who told him, "O Ali, Rahimahullah, support the positions that have been transmitted from me, for they are the truth." After which he abandoned the Mu'tazilites and became the champion of Islamic orthodoxy as embodied in the Quran and Hadith, defending it alike from the danger of image worship by interpreting divine attributes anthropomorphically and the danger of denying the positive significance of the attributes of Allah Ta'ala and the life of the hereafter by explaining them away.
Imam al-Ash'ari, so after he was a Mu'tazila, and the Mu'tazila, they were a deviant faction in the early days of Islam. He grew up in that until he was 40 years old, and he had this dream of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the next day, which was a Friday, he ascended the minbar and he told them, I am taking off the concept of al-Mu'tazila, or the belief of al-Mu'tazila, as if I am taking off this overgarment of mine, this cloak of mine. And he took off his outer garment and cast it aside. And from that point, he wrote and authored books defending the belief of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah and refuting the false claims of Al-Mu'tazila. But as the author mentioned here, Imam al-Ash'ari and the Ash'ari school is between two extremes. The extreme of Al-Mushabbiha, those who liken Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by assigning literal meanings to his attributes, which do not befit his status subhanahu wa ta'ala, that they are not permissible to attribute to Allah attributes of the creation. So that is one extreme. And the other extreme was al-Mu'attila, those who denied Allah's attributes and assigned meanings other than the words in the Quran and the Sunnah. So here you have these two extremes, denying the attributes of Allah or interpret them literally in an anthropomorphic way. The Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah, which are the Ash'a'ira and the Maturidiyya, are in the middle of that, where they have a tanzih. That is, they declare Allah transcended above non-befitting attributes. Now,
Imam Ash'ari did not give figurative interpretations, ta'wil, as discussed in another ruling, to problematic expressions of divine attributes, but rather urged that they be accepted as they have come without saying how they are meant, while affirming that Allah Ta'ala is absolutely beyond any likeness to created things. Though later members of his school,
which meant that Imam al-Ash'ari, he was famous to describe attributes that came in the Quran and the Sunnah, that the outward appearance or the outward meaning, the meaning that first come to your mind, may suggest non-befitting attributes. He would affirm those attributes, excuse me, trying to keep the cough down. He would affirm these attributes bila kayf, by saying that Allah is described with those attributes bila kayf, which means without a how. That Allah has those attributes without a how, right? So he would say, Lillahi yad bila kayf, that Allah is described with the attribute of yad without a how, right? Without ascribing non-befitting attributes to Allah. This is different from today's modern day mushabbiha, those who in our time, contemporaries of ours, who ascribe non-befitting attributes of Allah, and they use the term bila kayf to mean we don't know how, while still applying a howness or modality or kayfiyah to the attributes of Allah. So they'll say what is meant by bila kayf is there is a kayf, but we don't know the kayf. There is a how for Allah's attributes that we don't know. Where Ahl Sunnah and Imam al-Ash'ari understood by this term bila kayf that how cannot be attributed to Allah. So we don't say, as an example, which someone would say in English, that Allah has a hand, but we don't know how his hand is. No, Ahl Sunnah does not say that. They say that the attribute al-yad for Allah is a tribute to Allah, as it is mentioned in the Quran and the Hadith. However, How marfu anhu. The term how is negated about Allah. So whenever we talk about Allah's attributes, we do not even consider a how. Not that there is a how, but we just don't know it. Meaning that Allah has this literal attribute, but we don't know how it is. La, this is not the belief of Ahl Sunnah. This is the belief of those who liken Allah to His creation, which is not befitting to believe. Now, so beware of this fine. Uh, it seems thematic, but it's not. It's a great difference. And the Wahhabiyya of our time, they use these terminology to falsely attribute attribute themselves to a Salaf, which the Salaf is clear from their beliefs. Now,
Though later members of his school did give such interpretations in rebuttal of anthropomorphists, preserving the faith of Islam through their innovations in the same spirit and with the same dedication that the Imam had preserved it before them by his rebuttals of the Mutazilites.
So even though it was not the practice of Imam al-Ash'ari to go in detail in figurative interpretation, later Ash'ariyah, scholars of the school, when they were faced with the people of innovation among al-Mushabbiha and al-Mujassima and the like, those who gave Allah attributes of the creation, and attributes of the bodies, or attributes of bodies, they use figurative interpretation as a way of preserving divine transcendence. Now,
He authored nearly 300 books and treatises on all aspects of the faith of Ahl Sunnah and died in Baghdad, 324 and 324 936.
Yes. So for us, we should learn about our great scholars like Al-Imam al-Ash'ari and like Abu Mansur al-Maturidi, and stick to following the way of the majority of the Muslims in our Islamic tradition, both past and present. Now we go to our main basic text, the ladder to success in truly loving Allah. We reached up to the chapter in the conditions for following the Imam. So we're on page 56. Go ahead.
The author, may Allah Ta'ala.
Al-Fatiha to the soul of our author, Al-Habib Abdullah ibn Hussein ibn Tahir, Al-Fatiha. Okay, go ahead.
The author, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy on him, said, conditions for following. When someone is led in praying Friday prayer or any other prayer, it is required that, number one.
So we talked about conditions. We talked about the arkan of the prayer, the integrals of the prayer, and we talked about things that relate to the prayer. Now we're going to talk about what happens when one follows the Imam in Salah. What are the conditions that make following an Imam valid? So when we was talking about before, you're talking about praying alone. Now we're talking about when you pray in Jama'ah, in congregation, or in Al-Jumu'ah, or in the Friday prayer. There are rules to following, right? So what are those conditions that make it valid for one to follow the Imam? Now, go ahead.
Number one.
And here we're talking about following the Imam. And the Imam is the one who leads the prayer. The one who follows the Imam is called Al-Ma'mum. Let me put it. the one who follows the Imam, he is called al-ma'mum. He is the follower, right? Now, go ahead. And for a rule, a woman cannot be the Imam of men, as related in the hadith of Ibn Majah. The woman cannot lead the prayer of men. Now,
Number 1, he does not precede his imam in where he stands in initiating the prayer.
so
Moreover,
here, go ahead.
simultaneity in initiating the prayer invalidates it. Elsewhere, simultaneity is offensive, except when saying Amin.
So if the Imam leads the prayer, it is not permissible for the follower to get ahead of the Imam or to, right, be ahead of the Imam when standing or in making the initial takbir, the initial Allahu Akbar. So if they're standing, one must ensure that one's heels is behind the heels of the Imam. And that when one says Allahu Akbar, one does not say Allahu Akbar before the Imam, the opening Allahu Akbar. If one is sitting, then what one is going to determine is that one's buttocks is behind the buttocks of the Imam. So if they were both sitting in a prayer and they were sitting, then the way you're going to know you're behind the Imam is by way of having the Imam's buttocks behind yours. I mean, in front of yours. So you would lag behind the Imam or be behind the Imam enough to that you're not equal in sitting. And standing, you do it by the heels. Now,
Number 2, it is unlawful for the follower to precede him, i.e. his
I should
imam.
mention about so for the takbir, it is unlawful to be at the same time as the Imam, right? However, for following the Imam and you want to make Amin after reciting Al-Fatiha, you say that at the same time as the Imam. But to do the takbir before the Imam is invalid. And it is disliked to move at the same time, it's makruh, to move at the same time the Imam moves with his movements. So you should follow the Imam, not be simultaneous in his movements.
Number 2, it is unlawful for the follower to precede him, i.e. his imam, by one action that is an essential element. Preceding him in 2 essential elements invalidates the prayer. Likewise, lagging by 2 essential elements without an excuse invalidates, as does lagging by more than 3 long essential elements with it, i.e. with an excuse.
So here we should essential elements. They're called is called a rukn fi'li. So it is an essential element, means an element of action. So it is unlawful to get ahead of the Imam by one integral of action. For instance, the Imam is reciting Al-Fatiha. And while the Imam is reciting Al-Fatiha, one bows, performs a ruku, and then comes up to i'tidal, to the part of standing, while the Imam is still reciting in Al-Fatiha, right? This is haram. To be ahead of the Imam by one integral. But if it goes to 2 integrals of action, then one's prayer is invalidated. So if one goes, the Imam is still in Fatiha, one performs a ruku, then one goes to I'tidal and down to sujood and finishes the sujood, and the Imam is still up reciting Al-Fatiha, this would invalidate one's prayer. And it also invalidates to lag behind the Imam by 2 integrals, so the other way, without an excuse. So for instance, you are slow in reciting the Fatiha. So the Imam recites Al-Fatiha, he goes to bowing, then he comes up to Ittidal, then he goes to Sujood, and one is still reciting Al-Fatiha, right? And not moving, then one's salat would be invalidated if one did that, lag behind without an excuse. But if one did it with an excuse, then there is 3 integrals to it to be validated. With an excuse, you can have 2, like you're reciting the Fatiha. So then you would catch up with the Imam. But if it's 3 long integrals, like he comes from the second sujood and he even sits for a tashahhud, or he gets up to stand up for the next rakah and you're still reciting the Fatiha, the prayer would be invalid. Now,
Number 3. He is aware of his Imam's transitions by seeing him, hearing his voice, seeing parts of a line that sees him, or the like.
so the follower must be able to know the movements of one's Imam. La ilaha illallah. So he must know the movements of the Imam. So in other words, he either sees the Imam, or he sees someone who sees the Imam, or he hears the Imam's voice so that he knows when the Imam moves. What is considered an excuse is if one, for instance, is slow in reciting Al-Fatiha. Because Al-Fatiha, remember we mentioned, is an integral, right? So if one didn't perform the integral of Al-Fatiha, the prayer would be valid. But some may recite Fatiha slow because they're learning and they don't know how to recite well. So that would be an excuse to lag behind the Imam.
Number 4. They are together in a mosque, or within 300 dirhams, 144 meters, or 472.44 feet, approximately.
400 dirham.
Dirham, sorry. 144 meters, or 472.44 feet, approximately. An addition of 3 dirhams is harmless.
So here, among the conditions of following, that the Imam and the Ma'mum are in the mosque. So if they're inside a masjid, there is no distance between them that is obligatory to maintain. So if the Imam was way at the front of the masjid and the follower was way at the back of the masjid, that prayer is valid, so long as they're in a masjid. From this, as an indication, we know the ignorance of the one who says it's haram to have 6 feet between the Imam and the followers, or to be apart. Where do you get that from? This is not haram. It's not sunnah, but it's not haram. There's a big difference from something being a sunnah and a rewardable thing for something being unlawful, right? So you're talking about 6 feet. Here, as is in the Shafi'i school, they say in the masjid, there is no distance between the Imam and the follower, as long as they're both in the masjid. As the rule, the sunnah is to make the lines. Of course, it's sunnah to do this, and one should always fulfill the sunnah. But when we learn al-fiqh, we learn the rules between what is obligatory and what is recommended, and what is disliked and what is unlawful, right? So everything in the sacred law has a ruling for it. And as Imam al-Juwayni mentioned in his Warakat, in his book on Usul al-Fiqh, that famous book on Usul al-Fiqh, Imam al-Juwayni was the Sheikh of Imam al-Ghazali. And he said that the rules in the religion are obligatory, recommended, permissible, disliked, unlawful, valid, and invalid, right? And the one who doesn't know the rules of the religion, will make judgments that are not applicable. So here, if they're in the mosque, he said, so as long as you're being in the mosque, you are with your imam, it is valid. If you are outside of a masjid, right, then there cannot be a distance more than 300 dhira. The dhira, or cubits, is from the fingertip to one's elbow. That's called a 1 cubit, right? So you cannot be more than 3 cubits, right? So roughly, that is around 450, 472. These are approximations, roughly the distance, feet, right? Right? Here, that is when one is outside of the masjid. So if there were rows in the masjid and there wasn't enough space and people had to go outside, so long as between the exit, the last row and the row following it, it is not more than 300 dhira, 300, or we could say roughly, like I said, 400 is mentioned here, 472 feet, right? If you want to be more safe, say 450 feet. This is valid. So the rows could go. As long as between each row there's not that distance, is a valid prayer in the Shafi'i school. Here I'm speaking in the Shafi'i school. So when you say something is haram, you could say, possibly, it's unlawful in this school. But when you say it's unlawful in every case, then that means you have to have a knowledge of all the schools. And obviously that's not the case. Because I hear people making inkar on things that, or making inkar meaning censoring things that should not be censored, right? Because of a lack of knowledge, right? The person says, anyone who does that is haram. Did you master all the schools to know that? By the way, in this school, it's not haram. And this is a reliable school of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah. So be careful. Slow, as my teacher used to say, slow down, Chunky. Take your time. Slow down, Chunky. Take your time. MashaAllah. Now, go ahead.
Number 5. There is no barrier between them, the imam and the follower, that prevents passing between them. What is meant by passing is typical direct passing when outside the mosque, indirect passing when inside the mosque.
So long as there is not a wall or a window that blocks one from reaching the imam, then the prayer is valid. But if there is a wall or a window, like an elevated window where you cannot reach the imam, then in the Shafi'i school, the prayer is invalid. Now, the following is invalid. You'll get the reward of praying by yourself, but it's not as in Jama'ah.
Number 6. The overall structure of their two prayers matches. Morning prayer behind a funeral prayer, for example, is not valid.
So the format of the prayer must match. So you could pray in the Shafi'i school, for instance, Salatul Dhuhr behind someone who is praying Salatul Fajr. Why? Because the format of the prayer is the same, right? Or vice versa, right? Or you could pray Asr behind someone who is praying Isha. But praying those prayers behind a funeral prayer is not valid. Why? Because the funeral prayer does not have bowing and prostration, so the format is not the same. Now,
Number 7. They do not diverge in a recommended act resulting in a gross divergence, like performing the first tashahhud if the imam skips it.
So, for instance, there are sunnahs that are in the prayer, and there are obligations. So, for instance, among the sunnahs is sitting for the first tashahhud. So, if you have a prayer that's 3 rakah, or 4 rakah, you have 2 tashahhuds. You have the one in the second rakah and the one in the third, or the one in the second and the one in the fourth. The one in the third or the fourth rakah is the last tashahhud, and it is an obligation. It is a rukn of the prayer, meaning if you leave it out, the prayer is invalid. However, the first tashahhud is sunnah, a rewardable deed, but if you don't do it, you are not sinful. So if the imam left out that first tashahhud, the follower would leave it out as well. If the follower sat for that first tashahhud and the imam is in qiyam in the third rakah, for instance, reciting, and that follower is still sitting in the first tashahhud or doing the first tashahhud, his following of the imam will be invalidated. Why? Because the imam went to perform an obligatory act and he remained sitting to perform a recommended act, and hence his following of the imam would be invalidated. Now,
Number 8. He intends being led when initiating the prayer for Friday prayer and for prayers that are repeated or combined due to rain or vowed to perform in congregation.
so the follower has the intention to follow the imam with the opening Allahu Akbar in Salatul Jumu'ah. So in Salatul Jumu'ah, when the follower, after the imam makes a takbir, Allahu Akbar, the follower must intend to be a follower of the imam at that point in Salatul Jumu'ah. And in the other prayers, he must have that intention before following the imam. So he doesn't follow the imam in his movements without the intention, or he has a long waiting from the imam. Now,
Number 9. He intends being led before following in an action or closing salutation, and before any prolonged waiting for the sake of this following in other prayers, i.e., other than Friday prayer, repeated prayers, prayers combined due to rain, and prayers one has vowed to pray in congregation.
You have the prayer, repeat prayer. What is the repeat prayer, the repeated prayer? It is the prayer that one prays again after praying it in congregation, and one finds someone who didn't have the opportunity to pray in congregation. You would repeat that prayer with that person, right? As a repeat prayer. So one would have the intention for the repeat prayer, right? Or one prayed alone and one found a congregation praying in jama'ah, so one would join that prayer as jama'ah, as a congregation. Now,
The imam is required to intend leading or congregation for Friday prayer and repeated prayers, and for prayers combined due to rain and vow to pray in congregation.
so for the imam, so we were talking about the follower. Now the imam, when is he required to have the intention of imama, to be the imam? The author mentions when he's praying in Jumu'ah. So when he's performing Jumu'ah, he must have the intention to lead the prayer. And in the repeat prayers, to lead it, and for those prayers for the rain or for a vow, right? He intends Juma. In other prayers, it is sunnah to perform, to have the intention of Imam, but it's not an obligation. Sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Inshallah, we'll open up for your questions, inshallah. Sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi. There is details in this. If they're in a room in which they have a way to reach the Imam without, not that they go to the Imam, there is the ability to reach the Imam through an opening in which they don't have to turn away from the Qibla, the direction of the prayer, they don't have to turn their chest, then it is valid. Other than that, it's not valid, according to the Shafi'i school. Allah, yeah. I mentioned, so long as one is praying outside and there is not a distance greater than 300 cubits, or we say like 450 feet between the rows, is valid. So even if one was outside, it would be valid. Allah. I answer that. The excuse is like lagging behind for reciting Al-Fatiha. And you cannot skip it because Al-Fatiha is an integral, right? But if you catch up with the Imam, and because you didn't get it because you couldn't finish because the Imam was going to get too far ahead of you, like 3 integrals of action, then one would stop reciting Al-Fatiha, catch up with the Imam, and then repeat that rakat after the salam of the Imam to fulfill the, still get the reward of following. Now, no, Malika, I'm laughing, but I'm confused. So Ash'ari is a sect. Let me address this. Subhanallah. A sect, you have to define what you mean by a sect. A sect, if you mean by that, a group among the groups who claim to be Muslim, yes. So that's not bad in and of itself. The question is it a sect that is on the right way of the Quran and the Sunnah, right? And that's the answer. That's the real question. Yes, it is a sect. The Prophet ﷺ said that his nation, in a narration, would divide into 73 sects, right? Firaq, groups, sects. You can use the word sects if you want. Don't necessarily take it as a negative. It's a group of people, right, who have a certain practice. The Prophet said his nation would divide into 73 sects. كُلَّهُمْ فِي النَّارِ إِلَّا وَاحِدًا. He said all of them would go to hellfire, would be in the hellfire, except one. And the companions asked, مَنْ هُمْ يَا رَسُولُ اللَّهِ? So who are they? And he said, Al-Jama'ah, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. He said, the majority of my nation, right? So here, that sect is known as Al-Firqatun Najiyah, right? Al-Firqa Najiyah, right? Or you can say the saved sect if you want. or the saved group. Use any terminology you want for it, right? I mean, that means that meaning. What I mean, use the terminology, because people play with words. So use a word that you think has the same meaning, but is more befitting than the word sect. Because it's a game with this word sect, right? An error occurred. So al-firqatin najiyah is the saved sect. So when we say the Ash'aris, are they a sect? Or the Maturidiyya, are they a sect? In the term firqa, yes, meaning a group of people. But they are among firqatun najiyah. They are the saved group. And then you have other firaq, other sects that are sects of innovation, like al-mushabbiha, those who liken Allah to the creation, al-mujassima, those who give Allah bodily attributes, Ashia, right? Ashia, the Shiites, al-Mu'tazila was early groups, al-Khawarij, al-Wahhabiyya, for instance. So these sects, they are sects, but they are sects of misguidance, right? So now we have today, you'll find people who talk about Al-Ash'ari and Maliki and, right? Yeah, you know, right? And they'll say, like some of my friends who I totally disagree with this issue, they say, oh, we have all these sects. That the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that. So that's not a discovery. The problem or the concern we should have, not that there are so many sects. What is the right way to follow the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Which sect should we follow? And the Prophet answered that. He said, al-jama'ah in one narration. In another narration, ma ana alayhi wa ashabi, what I am upon and my companions. And when we examine what was the Prophet upon, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and his companions, we will find that that methodology is the same methodology employed by the Ash'aris and the Maturidis. Hence, that's why they're known as Imam al-Ash'ari and Imam al-Maturidi as the Imams, the two Imams of Ahl Sunnah. And that's why the scholars, they said, when we say Ahl Sunnah, we use the word Ash'ari, we're referring to the Ash'aris and the Maturidis. So listen, and I was telling someone today, yesterday, we were doing some studying, and there is a new book, which one of the great scholars, or one of the scholars, I don't have to use the word great, one of the scholars from Al-Azhar, he wrote in refuting Nasiruddin al-Albani, who was the hadith scholar of the modern day Salafi Wahhabi movement. And he asked me, it's a new book. He said, do you want the book? I said, yes, send it to me. Send me the table of contents. Let me read it. Let me see what is in it. And it was a very good study and examination of the positions and the life of Al-Albani. It was written by an Ash'ari scholar, a Sunni scholar, right? And I told him, I said, normally I wouldn't want these books. I'm not really concerned about Nasiruddin al-Albani. However, since we live in a time and in a place where that ideology, that Wahhabi Salafi ideology, has become the default position of most people who say they are Muslim, then it is obligatory upon us to clarify their issues of misguidance. It is obligatory to clarify their issues of misguidance, because most of us in America or in the West, we've been influenced by Wahhabi belief in the name of Salafiyya, claiming to attribute those bad beliefs to the Salaf as-Salih, to the righteous predecessors. So it's word games. And because we didn't learn, we don't have access to traditional classical scholarship, we're not familiar with the Arabic literature and the scholars, then what happens? They give you ideas and tell you things that are far away from the truth, but it becomes the letter of law in our communities. So it's an obligation at that point to clarify it, right? So for instance, you would hear someone today claiming that Albany, as an example, Nasiruddin Albany, is the greatest hadith scholar. Well, the person who hears that in our time, the person who hears that and they see his books and he got these books that he wrote, and they know nothing about hadith and scholars of hadith and what is compared, will easily fall into such a trap. Because when we look at a hadith scholar, we're looking at the level of al-Hafidh, one who had memorized 100,000 hadith with his chains of narration. We're not looking at someone who didn't even memorize the 6 books, like Al-Albani, who did not memorize the 6 books. He didn't memorize Bukhari, Muslim, Abu Dawud, Tirmidhi, and Nasai, Ibn Majah. He was a researcher, not a scholar of hadith. And what I mean, I'm not saying he didn't do good things, because we have to be fair. He did some good work, but not on the scale that scholars of hadith do. And his mistakes are dangerous mistakes that led to a lot of confusion in the field of hadith, in the field of fiqh, in the field of aqidah. This is real. So this is important to understand, right? So you'll have these people, like we got many of these, and I don't like to call them by name. When I was younger, I would have called your name, but I won't. So you're lucky, I'm getting old, right? But you got these guys today that are Wahhabi, Azhari, they are just a mess, mixed with everything. And their famous line, we got to get rid of all these sects. So you make your own sects called Jumbo Soup. That's your sect now. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Really, it's a lot of trickery going on. And now, because the Wahhabi Salafi movement has been exposed, a lot of them are moving to a way to try to make those same beliefs acceptable. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. So to answer, and that's a long answer to your question. So from the term as the Ash'ariyya sect, yes, like any other sect. However, they are the saved sect. They are the sect that represents the belief of the Prophet ﷺ and his companions and the majority of the Muslim nation. So let's not use the word sect to be confused by that. Firqa in Arabic, we say firqa, right? Firqatul Ash'ariyya, al-firqatul Maturidiyya. Now, you have al-firqatul Wahhabiyya, but that's not the saved sect. That is a deviant sect, right? That is misguided in many issues. But as you keep learning, and that's what I said, we can't microwave it, we got to slow cook it. You keep learning, you're going to identify this stuff with ease, right? You're going to understand this stuff with ease. But you got to learn, it takes time. You got to get familiar with the names. You got to get familiar with scholarship. That's why we're reading biographies. I'm telling you, and I don't know if y'all get this, right? People been using us as guinea pigs in Islam. Seriously. You could be honest. many of us have followed these movements and don't know nothing, right? Really, our knowledge of was just really blind following. You know, the ones who say no blind following are the worst blind followers. I'll give you a story. You know, I like story time, Imam Fahim, story time. This young kid, he was a friend of my son. He was a fanatical Wahhabi. Now remember, I don't call Wahhabi Salafi because it's a misnomer. I don't use the word Salafi except to tell you I'm talking about the Wahhabi. Why? Because the Salafis are Wahhabis. They just changed their name to confuse you. So I don't do that. And my teachers, they say, don't call them Salafiyya. Call them who they are, Wahhabiyya. Like, straight up. Call them who they are. And that's just to identify them. I'm not putting you down. No, that's your methodology. Let's not confuse methodologies. Because what you're trying to say, this was the methodology of the Salaf, and that is a big fat lie. The Salaf didn't believe what you believe. They didn't practice like you practice. That you are claiming to follow the Salaf. You are not following the Salaf. And all you got to do is read the classical books of Islamic scholarship in hadith, in tafsir, in fiqh, in aqidah, and you will see that is not the methodology of the Salaf. So someone would read the unnoble Quran that they call the noble Quran and see things in there that are blasphemous beliefs, that are not befitting to Allah, and say this is the position of the Salaf, or this is the position of Al-Bukhari or Al-Qurtubi or At-Tabari or Ibn Kathir. And if you go read Al-Bukhari, you go read At-Tabari, Tafsir At-Tabari, you read Tafsir Al-Qurtubi, you read Tafsir Ibn Kathir, and it is the totally opposite of what they put in the book. Subhanallah. Subhanallah. But we don't have access, most of us, to the commentaries on Al-Bukhari or Al-Bukhari itself in Arabic. We don't have access to the original tafsir of At-Tabari in Arabic language, or tafsir Al-Qurtubi, or tafsir Ibn Kathir in Arabic, because that translation of Ibn Kathir, they cut it out. They chopped it up and edited it and put what they wanted in it. It's not the whole book. It doesn't have all the narrations that are in the book. They pick and choose what they want to give to you. You read the book, you be like, wait. Why did you leave that out? It doesn't fit our indoctrination. That's why we left it out. You'll never know because you don't study the books. SubhanAllah. And we're not going to give them to you either. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. But let me tell you the story about this young brother. He was a friend of my son, and he's studying in the University of Medina. So he used to come to my house, and he was a friend of my son. So I mean, when I'm talking about them, I'm talking about from a strictly religious point. As how I deal with them, I understand that people, they got to learn and it takes time. So the young kid, I wouldn't be hard with him. I mean, I understand that's what's out there. He's going to learn. And I used to tell him, yo, you just got to learn. So he would come to my house and he would always want to debate. He was a very energetic young man. He wanted to debate. And I would tell him, I said, you're not qualified to debate. You don't know enough yet. You can't debate. No, I'm on the haqq. I'm on the truth. And I'm on the way of the Salaf. And you on that bid'ah, that Ash'ari stuff. So now in my house, we have an extensive Arabic library in my home. Like most of my property is books. So all these books you're talking about, they're in my house. And he sees them. And I said, well, whenever you got to go study first, because we can't have a conversation because it's going to be over your head. And you're not going to listen to when I break it down. So I got to wait till you learn. And then we sit down and we really have a real talk. But in the meanwhile, let me share some things with you. So one day we were driving. I was taking them somewhere. And he's always quoting Sheikh Al-Albani said, Sheikh Al-Albani said, right? So I was messing with him. To give you the example of what I'm talking about. So I had a tape of Nasiruddin Al-Albani. So I was playing the tape. And he was like, MashaAllah, who's that? I said, that's Sheikh Albany. I said, you don't know Albany? You always quoting him and talking about what Albany said and Albany said, and you're listening to him and you don't even know who he is. That's us. You know what I mean? That's us, right? I'll tell you another story about this little kid. May Allah, mashallah, he's a grown man now. He's 30 something. And, excuse me. And one time I brought a sheikh from Yemen, from Tarim, to the Masjid. Sheikh Imam, he's originally from Palestine, but Sheikh Imad ad-Din, rahimahullah, let's recite Al-Fatiha for his soul. Al-Fatiha ila ruh Sheikh Imad ad-Din Abu Hijla. Fatiha. Sheikh Imad, I get to laugh every time I think about him. Rahimahullah, rahmatin wasiyah. So he was living in Tarim in Yemen at this time. So I would bring him like 2 times a year to America, from Yemen to America, and he would come to the Masjid and we would teach classes together and we would travel to different places and give lectures, right? So he was doing a lecture on Sahih Bukhari in the Masjid. So everybody came, Sheikh from Yemen, they was coming. So those Salafi young kids, they came and they sat in this class. And so after the class, I had left out. I went in my office for something. And when the class had ended, when I came back, those Salafis, they had Sheikh Imad in the corner, surrounded, talking about bid'ah and weak hadith and blah, 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 on and on and on and on with their stuff. And it was just so funny. Sheikh Imad was in the corner like, what the heck is going on here? Because he's thinking, I'm a sheikh, there's a certain amount of respect. Who are these young kids? And he don't know how to handle them because he's new in this area, right? He's been living overseas. So they're giving him the business. So when I come back, I got kind of angry. And let's skip that part. But I was offended. So because the sheikh was there, I had to handle it a different way. The way I would have normally handled it, which was not the best way, would have been a little different. Would have been a little rough, a little with a message they would have understood. But since the sheikh was there, I had to be on my best behavior. So while they're cornering him, sheikh is just like, he's trying to talk, but they just on it, right? So I said to the young guy was really leading it. So I said to him, I said, stop, knock it off. Give yourself a break. I said, you're talking about al-Bukhari. I said, what's Imam al-Bukhari's name? He said, Imam al-Bukhari. And I said, no. What's his name? That's his, what we call, that's his nisbah, meaning he's from Bukhara. So he's called al-Bukhari. What's his name? He's looking. And they're all looking, all of them surrounded. They don't even know his name. Right? Don't even know his name. Right? I said, what is the name of the book of al-Bukhari? What's the name? You said Sahih Bukhari. No, what's the name of the book? I don't know. You're talking about Sahih and Da'if, and this hadith was Da'if and Da'if. What's the conditions for a hadith to be Sahih? Nothing. Nothing. Also, you don't even know how you determine if a hadith is Sahih, or Hasan, or Da'if, or Mawdu'a for that, or fabricated for that matter. You don't know. Go sit down. You don't know what you're talking about. at all. And you're going to a sheikh and you're challenging him, and you have no idea what you're talking about. You just learned a few terms and you don't know what you're talking about at all. It wasn't that nice the way I said it, but you know. And the sheikh, he said to me, he was like, all right, give him a break, lighten up on him. I'm like, it's so disrespectful, and you don't even know what you're doing, right? But that's just the habit. That's what they learned. So now that I'm older, I wouldn't do it the same way, not so harsh, but they didn't learn. So that's the same thing. Ash'aris is a sect. You don't even know what Ash'ari is. You have no idea. And then I remember, let me finish. Another story. I got a lot of stories, but I'm going to share this one with you. Imam Fahim likes stories. And I'll stop after this story. I promise. One of those Medina graduates, he was teaching in a masjid in another city close to our city. So they invited me. No, they did. Was I invited? Or did we just stop by because the imam wanted to talk to me? I don't remember. But anyway, I happened to go. So I sat in the class. And he's telling this thing, right? He's telling his, Medina stuff and University of Medina and Salafi and blah, 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 on and on and on. And we got to be on the way of the Salaf al-Salih and blah, blah, on and Wahhabi talk, right? And he got 2 books. He has one book, Al-Waraqat, by Imam al-Juwayni. So that's in Usul al-Fiqh, in the foundations of fiqh. He got one book. Okay. And then he has another book, Nukhbat al-Fikr, of Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, in the science of hadith, ulum al-hadith. Both of these with Wahhabi commentaries from some Salafi sheikh. Ibn Uthaymeen, I think, was one, and another one was by somebody else. But they were like Wahhabi commentaries on his book. So, and now when he saw me come in, his face was like, uh-oh, here come this guy. He had that look, right? And he was trying, he said, uh-oh, here comes this guy, right? And so I said to him, let me ask you a question. I said to him, who are the original authors of those books? Who are they? He said, what do you mean? I said, that book you got, who wrote the book, the original author? I knew the answers. What it calls Imam Juwayni, and this one is by Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani. I said, what was their madhab? What was their madhab? They were Shafi'i. Oh, so they didn't have this idea of not following the madhab. Both of those authors followed the madhab. They were both Shafi'i, Imam al-Juwayni and Al-Hafidh Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani. I said, in Aqidah, what was their school of thought? And you should have saw his eyes went like this, right? I said, what was their school of thought? Spit it out. He's looking. I said, they were Ash'ari, wasn't they? Why you didn't tell the people? You tell them all the stuff. You are using their books and refuting their doctrine by getting status from their books. What kind of deceit is this? If they were deviant in Aqidah and they were blind following madhabs, why you need their books? Why don't you have your own stuff? Explain. Why you don't have your own stuff? Why you take from deviants? And then I said to him, because they in our area, and they're talking about I'm a deviant, and we Ash'aris and Sufis. I said, and they were all Sufis. We're deviants. We're a sect, and we're deviant. But you referring to all of our books from our teachers and our scholars, and then you put your footnotes to fool people and don't tell them what they're really learning. I said, listen, why don't you tell the people the truth? And you call us misguided, deviants, and don't go to Masjid Muhammad, and don't learn from Masjid Muhammad. But you referring to the same people who we relate from with an unbroken chain of narration. You're reading their books, and you're studying their books, and you're using their information to validify your own stuff. But the same people is the same doctrine and belief that we have. So why is it permissible to take from them and not permissible to take from us, and we're saying the same thing? Explain. That don't make any sense. You can take from us because we're Ash'ari and Sufi and Shafi'i, but you can take from Al-Juwayni and Ibn Hajar Asqalani, who were Sufi, Ash'ari, and Shafi'i. How do you judge? Explain. Except that that's deceiving. Explain. That's why I said get to know our scholars, get to know our books, get to know our chains of narration, and then you easily expose this stuff. But if you don't know, it's easy to tell you anything, right? You know, they used to say, if you believe that, I got a bridge to sell you. Yeah. If you believe that Wahhabi, Salafi stuff is the way of the Ahl Sunnah and the way of the Prophet, I got a bridge to sell you. A suspension bridge that I built. And I don't know nothing about architecture or engineering. La ilaha illallah. So that's the end of my stories. I'm sorry. The other questions I can't address. We'll address them tomorrow because I'm way over time and it's not right for me to infringe on your time. I always fall short. Sheikh Samir would give me the blues about this stuff. May Allah help me. But this is why I say we have to learn. We have to learn. It's important. And don't be angry with the others. Understand that they are victims. These are our people. These are our brothers and sisters, our friends, our cousins. They just don't know. And no one told them. So don't get mad at them. Like, help them. Explain the truth in the best way you can. Right? And understand that it's going to take. I told Abdul Aziz yesterday, I said, man, we're going to be another 20 years trying to unravel this stuff. Minimum, before people understand what Sunni Islam really is. We're going to be another 20 years trying to clarify that. Because they're still active and they're you know, what's the word I want to use? What's the caterpillar do? Transforming. They are transforming into different forms, right? So it ain't the same, right? They're changing their name again. They're changing their approach. It's the same stuff, but it's just, you know, being transformed to make it more acceptable. But it's the same stuff. And that's why I say forget names, learn the knowledge. Learn what is really being taught. Learn all of these things. And the worst thing you have is when people tell you, don't listen to them, don't leave. Nah. You better listen so you know what people saying, and then you better use the scale of learning the difference. Right? Metamorphosis. Yeah, there you go. That's right, Abdullah. Barakallahu fikum. Right? You better learn. Seriously. I remember one of my, I said no more stories. With your permission, I'll tell another story. Without your permission, I'll save it till tomorrow. So if I get a consensus, if I get 10 people out of all these people, no, I need 20 people. I'll tell one story if you want, or not, I'll wait till tomorrow. So let's see how many yeses I get. Go ahead. That's 1.
Yes.
2. 3. Bismillah. Okay. So far, not enough. Okay, go ahead. I need more. Because I'm on your time. And if I'm infringing on your time, I got to stop. Okay, I'll tell you this story. There is a famous scholar, so we talked about Albany, who was a librarian, if you want, who was good at his library work. And I mean, I'm not just being sarcastic. He was a good librarian. Albany, he studied in Al-Maktab al-Zahiriyya in Damascus. And he used to just read the manuscripts and read the books. He was a good librarian. Not a hadith scholar, a librarian, a good researcher. I don't take that away from him. But the real Huffaz in our time, in his time, among them was Al-Hafiz Abdullah ibn Siddiq al-Ghumari, rahmatullah alayh, right? Al-Hafiz Abdullah ibn Siddiq al-Ghumari, he was from Morocco. And when he went as a kid to Al-Azhar in Egypt, he was an authority in hadith for the sheikhs of Azhar. When he got his like equivalent PhD or bigger, right? They gave it to him. They said, when he finished his studies, they said, usually when we give this high degree to someone, it is an honor for them to have this high degree from Azhar. But in your case, it is an honor for Azhar to have you accept our degree. Subhanallah. You heard that? That's a statement. It is an honor for Azhar for you to accept our degree. And his older brother, Al-Hafiz Ahmed al-Ghumari, was the same in knowledge and hadith, right? One of my teachers, he was the private secretary of Abdullah ibn Siddiq al-Ghumari. And when I went to study with him, I just wanted to get the books and knowledge of Sheikh Abdullah al-Ghumari. That's all I was interested in. And I never forget this lesson. And I thank him to this day for the lesson. At the time, I thought he was crazy, I'm gonna be honest with you. He said to me, I'm not going to teach you the books of Sayyidi Abdullah until you first read the books of Al-Albani. And I looked at him like, huh? He said, that's my condition. If you want me to teach you the books of Sayyidi Abdullah, you must first read the books of Al-Albani. If you accept, I'll help you. If not, you're not serious. I wanted those. In that time, his books were hard to find. So I wanted this so bad. I said, all right, deal. So I read, he gave me, read this, Silsilat al-Ahadith al-Da'ifa, Silsilat al-Ahadith al-Sahiha, all these different books of Al-Albani, major works. And he said, I just want you to go through them and read them and get a concept of him. And then when I finished, well, he was satisfied that I actually went through and looked at him, not every single word, but a lot of it, meaning I understood what was in the books, right? I understood his methodology. I understood that. And then he gave me a book. The first book he gave me was a refutation of Sheikh Abdullah al-Ghumari against Al-Albani. And when I read that refutation, I was able to compare it to the actual work of Al-Albani and see the mistakes. And a light clicked on when he did that. I was like, oh, I got it. Had I would have just read the works of Sheikh Abdullah al-Ghumari without being familiar with what Albany actually said and what he did and his methodology, I would have just been blind following and not knowing what I was doing. But by doing that, he exposed me to what is scholarship and what is the librarian. What is a hadith scholar, what is a hafiz, and what is a librarian. To the point that the scholar said, Albany, and we have the books. I still have them. All of his books, we have them. Like his major works, I have them. And I was able to go look at all of the points he was making because I actually had the books. And I knew and I could see the mistakes. And they said in this way, they said Albany's mistakes were so many, if one wanted to, they could write a book. Albany refutes himself. No one has to write. Just take his books, and his books will refute him. His own books. You don't need no other books. And I said, subhanallah. Right? Subhanallah. It's deep. Don't compare Albany to us. We're nothing to the likes of him. He was a giant in his knowledge. We don't take that away from him. But you compare people to their equals. You don't compare them to those who are less than them, right? You don't. You compare them to their equal, to the people in their field, in their status, and then you weigh them. You don't weigh, I'll give you an example. You don't weigh, I played basketball. I used to play basketball when I was younger. I even got a state championship under my belt, right? I could play basketball, right? Not no more, I'm old, but I'm talking about, I used to play. But you cannot compare me to LeBron James and Michael Jordan. There's no comparison whatsoever, right? So me saying LeBron James is better than Michael Jordan, or Michael Jordan is better, or Magic, it has no weight. Now let them have that conversation, then you will see, right? Let a professional basketball player who's in the NBA, who played against Michael Jordan, who played against LeBron, who played against Kobe, let them have that discussion. Then it's something you can weigh. But someone who can't dribble or shoot or doesn't know anything technically on the court, they can't get in that conversation. So when you compare those, compare them. Yeah, no compare. There's no comparison between them. No compare is how my sheikh talks, one of them. And I've heard him say it so much it became my own too. But, so, you know, that's the point. You know, that's the reality. So weigh people according to the people in their field, right? And see what the people of their field say about them, right? So go to scholars who had memorized 100,000 hadith, like Sayyidi Abdullah al-Ghumari, right? You weigh them to those type of people, and then you'll see, are you the hadith scholar of the time, for example, right? But then have the real talk. And we need to get there and not just blind follow people. We need to actually do some studies, right? And then weigh, it's fair. And don't let nobody say, oh, this is just for the scholars. But you trying to, it's just for the scholars, but you want me to follow your way without knowing nothing about the scholars. Leave that to the scholars while you tell me Wahhabi stuff. Okay. So why don't we leave it to the other scholars? Why we got to leave it to your scholars? If we're going to take a default position, let's take the default position of the majority of scholars. Why are we taking this deviant default position and then you want to tell us to stop there? It's a game. They hijacked our religion, really. And we should learn to fix it. And I'll stop there because I've gone overboard. May Allah reward you all for your patience in putting up with my antics. May Allah reward you and increase you and make you winners in this world and the hereafter. Barakallahu fikum. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuhu.